Okay, here we are in chapter 10. We're looking at the divorce experience, and we're going to highlight basically in this chapter what has been the history of divorce in Canada. We're going to look back a little bit, and what are some of the causes of divorces, and what are the developmental stages of divorce. And then we'll also consider three crises of divorce. Now, this isn't quite what maybe what you think it is. We'll see. And how might divorce affect children? And then lastly, we'll look at some of the issues around the custody of children. Divorce is the legal disillusionment of a marriage. And so it's legal. You just don't walk away from one another and call it a divorce. So a divorce is the dissolution of a marriage legally. Excuse me. It's also the most common deviation from the traditional family's life cycle. So it's more common to have a divorce than to have a death of a spouse, or any other breaking up of a marriage, but divorce is that. Now, divorce also seems to add 2 or 3 phases to the life cycle. So one of the life cycle phases that's added is, of course, separation. And then there's perhaps remarriage. And perhaps if you do the remarriage, and whether or not you don't, there's a stabilization into a new family pattern, whether that be separated with a child, that's a new family pattern, or remarriage and stabilizing into that new family pattern. And divorce is not uniform, and so it shouldn't really be considered an oversimplification. It's much more complex as not just being we're breaking up, we're having a divorce. It's much more complex than that. And in practice, divorce experience is quite diverse for couples and their families. I mean, divorces can happen at 20, they can happen at 60. They happen with children and without children. I mean, it makes a wide variety of ways in which divorce can be experienced, and it's not just a uniform, simple way of going through a change of phase. Now, in terms of some of the history of divorce, it hasn't always been common in Canada. In early Canada, laws for divorce restrict, and divorce was infrequent. Actually, the church was a very dominant focal point of social life, and it forbade any divorces. By 1867, the federal parliament had exclusive authority over divorce. If you wanted a divorce, you had to go to parliament and go that route. Men, they needed to prove adultery by their wife. Women needed to prove desertion, so that they had to prove that their husband hadn't been around for 2 years or longer, or they needed to prove extreme mental or physical cruelty. Now, around Confederation, anyone living in the province without a divorce court could submit a private member's bill to Parliament. Now, this was something that took a long time. It was expensive. If it was passed and the divorce was granted, but it wasn't something that happened very quickly. By 1925 and onward, women can get a divorce based on proof of adultery only. Now, divorce has increasingly become more common at midlife. After children have left the family home and couples have time to reassess marriage, many of these silver separations are initiated by women. Most feel relief at leaving an unfulfilling relationship. Divorce can be difficult for a homemaker wife who's been out of the paid workforce for many years. Some see divorce as a personal failure because they didn't make their marriage work. Now, there is a term that's used. It's called the divorce rate, and you see the figure 10.1 in front of you now. This is a measure that predicts the proportion of couples that can be expected divorced by their 30th wedding anniversary based on current patterns of divorce. Now, immediately after World War II, the divorce rate jumped, and you can see that there on the chart, resulting from a freedom and financial independence that women experienced in the workforce while men were at war, hasty wartime marriages, and some prolonged separations because of the war. For the next 2 decades, divorce rates were lower. Divorce legislation changed in 1968, and it changed again in 1985, and each change brought increases in the divorce rate. Changes in the divorce rate in 1968, that was where they introduced the no-fault principle, while maintaining the fault principle, which was based on adultery and cruelty. This was available for both men and women. And in 1985, they reduced the waiting periods by granting divorces after 1 year of marriage breakdown, resulting in an enormous increase in the number of divorces in Canada. This next slide you'll see is looking at the breakdown of these marriages over the 30-year total divorce rate. And you're looking at it by the top line as being Canadian, so look at the overall Canadian average from 1998 through to 2008. But take note of Quebec, take note as well as Alberta and Yukon, and notice the difference there compared to some of the other provinces. Now, why do people divorce? Well, there's a number of different reasons. The Divorce Act recognizes 3 legal grounds: cruelty, adultery, and being separated for 1 year. And in Canada, separation is the main grounds because proving cruelty and adultery can be a time-consuming and expensive endeavor. Researchers, sociologists, and others have identified 3 kinds of reasons people divorce, and you're seeing in front of you the 3 types of reasons. Fundamental issues like infidelity and abuse, experiential issues like disagreements and unsatisfactory sex life, and fertility issues like infertility and the desire to have children. And you can see by generation what kinds of groups had what kinds of percentage of agreement as to these would be reasons for divorce. There are social factors that increase the likelihood of divorce. You know, if you marry before the age of 20, you're more likely to separate later in life. Lower socioeconomic status can relate to higher divorce rates. Cohabitation before marriage increases the likelihood of divorce, and spouses whose parents have divorced are more likely to divorce. Now, these aren't guarantees. These are just statistical statements of what has been observed. It doesn't certainly depict what it would be a guarantee that everyone will experience. Now, when you think about going down the road to divorce, there are 3 basic considerations that a lot of people don't do, but maybe many people should do. And that is, the decision to divorce is something that first needs to be approached. Oftentimes couples don't make this decision. They find themselves at a point where they can't live with each other, but they never made the decision to divorce. Decision to divorce does not usually occur in a single phase. People may delay separation until a time when they consider it suitable. Women may find a job or go back to school. Couples wait until children leave home. Some minority groups emphasize family ties and responsibility above personal satisfaction. At any rate, at some point before you get to going to have a divorce, the couple decides that this is what they want to pursue. The second point, and this is a point that often doesn't get done very thoroughly or very well, but a couple must plan the breakup of the family system. They need to work out cooperatively to settle issues such as custody of children, visitation, finances, the legal right and responsibilities to care for a child in one's own home. Planning process often does not run smoothly, and many couples separate and reconcile repeatedly. This can be a very difficult time. And then the third, which is another a very important part, but is also a difficult part, and that is the separation and family reorganization. Separation changes the relationship between husband and wives. Couples with children need to decide how to coordinate the responsibility as co-parents. Many feel joint custody is best for children. When both parents are involved, children act as links between the 2 connected households, becoming a binuclear family. Now, there are in the process of divorcing what are called crises of divorce. Divorce produces what is called transitional states, temporary imbalances of routines, your roles, traditions, and these come with consequences. And for some, this is an emotional crisis. During and after the separation process, individuals suffer a loss of an important relationship, even if that relationship was perceived as not important anymore or even bad. Often it served as a center of their lives where, whether it was satisfactory or not, separation and divorce usually means that individuals have to redefine themselves as people. With the growing number of divorced people, new social scripts are being developed. Relationship with extended family members change. Many have limited support of their own relatives with strong religious beliefs. May long for connection to ex-spouses' relatives who they may no longer legally be related to. Most adapt, but by about 2 years post-divorce. Within 6 years, most have built a reasonably satisfying life. You can see the patterns on table 10.3, patterns of adjustment to divorce. Now, the second type of crisis is economic, and this is the most expensive, of course. It usually means a drop in the standard of living, especially for the custodial parent, the parent with the child. Both parents are responsible for the support of children. If the non-custodial parent, usually the father, does not have a steady job or has disappeared, the family may be reduced to living on welfare. And then lastly is parenting crisis. When a family separates, new boundaries must be drawn. Old family rules and rituals may not exist anymore, and new ones have not yet really taken their place yet. Each parent needs to establish a relationship with the child or children separate from each other. If there's no clear understanding of the new rules of the relationship, the child or children are likely to become victims of conflict between the parents. Divorcing parents may be unable to respond to their children's emotional needs. You will see on page 227 an effect that's called the sleeper effect, related to parenting and children. Now, this next section is the stressors, the protective factors and stressing factors. You'll see in the red stressors, and in the green you'll see are the protective factors. Divorce transforms children's lives forever. Affects where they live, how they interact with parents, if and how they continue relationships with their friends. If children want their parents, few children want their parents' divorce. No matter how much tension there's been in the marriage, children from divorced families are at greater risk for developing problems than children in a stable two-parent family. However, most do not. Age of the child is important. Very young children are less likely to be affected long-term by divorce if they are receiving good parenting. Divorce may affect boys and girls differently. The level of parental conflict pre- and post-separation impacts adjustments more than the absence of the parent. That just means that the more conflict that there is that children witness, either that's pre-separation or post, is far more troublesome and difficult for children than one parent just not being around. The number and degree of life changes has an impact on children, access to extended family members, nature of the new parenting relationships. Of course, it's going to have impact on children, and it does. One of the main issues when it comes to divorce when there's children involved is custody. And who gets custody? The current standard used is that it's in the best interest of the child. In fact, family law is not interested in the fight between the parents. They're interested in what is in the best interest of the child. Mothers still are usually granted custody, although more fathers are now gaining custody, and joint custody is becoming more common. Children can and do become pawns in an angry fight between parents, unfortunately. But usually this is a hallmark of families where they haven't had strong communication, so they really don't communicate with one another. They continue to use their kids as a way of communicating to one another. Carrying on with custody is some of the problem areas. There's two major problem areas that arise out of custody conflicts: failure to comply with support orders and failure to comply with custody provisions. Provinces are responsible for enforcing child support orders. Not federally and not by city, but by province. That's where the laws come from. Some parents try to prevent visits if support is not paid. If there is a visitation agreement, you cannot compromise that without having consequences for yourself. Occasionally, the non-custodial parent takes the law into their own hands and kidnaps the child. Provinces are responsible for enforcing child support orders. Now, if there's something as a court order that your circumstances change, then if you bring it to the court, then that court order can be changed. You can't arbitrarily change those court orders yourself because you want or because you feel slighted by the other partner. When we think in terms of custody with parents, it's also parents who don't have the custody. And what's that like? Most non-custodial parents are men. When the marriage is broken, men are sometimes at a loss as to how to manage the father-child relationship on their own. There's a great deal of pressure in society for mothers to assume custody of their children following a breakup of a marriage. There's even still stigma attached to mothers who refuse custody of their children, or because of the circumstances, they may not gain custody, the father may. And then when we think in terms of the future, what's in it for divorce? What about families and divorce in the future? Predictions that the future, at least half of all marriages will dissolve in a divorce. The implications, how to best ensure the health and development of children living in the divorced family. Children tend to do best when they have continuity in their relationships and have regular contact with both parents and their extended families if possible. Children also need to be assured of adequate financial support. Achieving this demands serious commitment of both parents and to the welfare of the children. Also requires effective enforcement laws as backup. Children's best interests are served if parents receive adequate backup from extended families and society as a whole. If left to do everything alone, the phenomenon of single parenting burnout will continue to occur. So I hope this was helpful. I'm sorry that we didn't get us up all in a hurry. I'm going to try and get another one out for you very soon and get the rest of them up shortly. Alrighty then, good luck, and look forward to your assignment 2s.